Well, hello and welcome everyone. I am here with Karl Wiegers today. Hi, Karl.
Hi,
Karl,
Laura. Thanks for
hi.
inviting me.
I am so excited to be interviewing you. I learned you're the author of 11 books, including this recent one, Successful Business Analysis Consulting. So congratulations. And
Thank you.
just like I remember when I was starting out in the business analysis space and learned about you and your work and got to meet you at an event, and just like the contribution that you've made to our profession is just over the top. And so it's really an honor to be here and to have you share some of your wisdom with our community. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you, Laura. It was fun to meet you at that event as well, because one of the things I miss about not doing conferences too much anymore is that I don't get to meet some of the people who are in the industry and see some of my old friends too. But it's nice to get a chance to meet folks once in a while.
Yeah, and I'm in a similar position. I don't do a lot of conferences, so I think that's the one time that we managed to connect. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, anyways, kind of a little bit about you. So you've been writing and talking about software requirements for a long time. Like, can you tell us just a little bit about how you got started in that space?
Sure. I realized recently, and was kind of shocked to realize, I started learning how to program almost 49 years ago in college. And that hardly seems possible. That's scary close to half a century, but I don't
Mhm.
want to say it that way. And back then when we were programming, you didn't really talk much about requirements. You got an assignment from the professor, or you had some other project you were working on, and you had an idea of what you wanted to do, and maybe you write up some notes or some screen sketches and off you go. And time passed. I got out of grad school. In fact, 1/3 of my PhD thesis in organic chemistry was code. So I've been doing this for quite a while.
Mhm.
And I went to work at Kodak after I finished my postdoc. And after a while, I started doing a fair amount of programming there as well. And also about that same time, I got into home computing. Back then we had what were called microcomputers, Ataris and Apples and things like that. And I was very active in that kind of space. And so I did a lot of programming at home, did a lot of programming at work. And every once in a while, I would notice that I felt like my project was out of control. Not the project, just the program I was working on. I felt like I was out of control. I didn't quite know what I was doing. I was fumbling around. Maybe I'd even start to panic. And what I realized when I thought about it is that I just hadn't spent enough time thinking through what I was supposed to have when I was done. And so that led me to start thinking about requirements a little bit more and learning about them and what they are and how you represent them and why it's a good idea. And after I started doing that, I never again felt like a project was out of control. That was a much better feeling. And the
And
group
so
that
you
I was
started
in,
doing that first,
right.
the requirements first.
If
Yeah.
if I spend some time thinking about requirements and understanding where I'm heading before I
Yeah.
dive in and start driving somewhere, then I pretty much usually get where I'm going. So the group I was in at the time, a software group supporting photographic research labs at Kodak, started learning a lot about better ways to approach requirements. And we learned about and applied techniques like close customer involvement. In fact, we came up with an idea we called the product champion approach, which was basically the same idea that Agile has said, oh, hey, why don't we work closely with our customers? That's a pretty good idea in any case, I think.
Yeah.
And we started doing that around 1985. So, we were maybe a bit ahead of the curve in some of those things. We learned about prototyping, visual modeling, use cases, testing and reviews of requirements and things like that. And once we learned how to make those techniques work for us, we found our projects went a lot more smoothly. And I found myself taking kind of a lead role as a requirements analyst on some projects throughout the company. And that felt natural to me. I think requirements engineering was kind of a good fit for my skills and my interests and my personality. So as you probably know, over time, the idea of a requirements analyst kind of morphed into a business analyst. We don't talk
Mhm.
about requirements engineers or requirements analysts anymore. Everybody's a BA. And I think a lot of chunks of BA work go well beyond requirements, but that's still, I think, a core function that most BAs perform. You think that's still true?
For sure, for sure. And the pieces that go beyond are, the interaction with people, but it's all about like what are the requirements, right? What is the
Yeah.
problem we're solving? What do the people want? How do we collaborate with them? But it all comes down to how do we actually figure out what are we going to do here?
Yeah. How do
Yeah.
we know when we're done? I mean, without
Right.
requirements, I don't know how you answer the question, are we done yet?
Right.
So this is still a strong interest of mine, and I began writing and speaking about what we'd learned and what we'd accomplished, and kind of trying to share whatever I'd learned about how to do a better job on requirements through speaking and writing, because I figured why should everybody have to climb the same learning curves that we did? So that's a common challenge, and that's kind of how I got into this. It wasn't really a plan, but
Mhm.
turns out there was a need and it was an interest of mine. So here I am.
Awesome. Well, we're all grateful for that.
Thanks.
So I know we want to talk a lot about your consulting career today and kind of give a flavor to that. Can you kind of take us forward to when you decided to leave corporate and become an independent consultant? What did that transition look like?
Well, I was, pretty well ensconced at Kodak. I worked there for 18 and a half years, mostly in the research labs and then in some product software development areas, doing process improvement work toward the end of my career. Because I moved into software, even though I started out as a research scientist, I moved into software after about 4 years there. And like I said, I'd started writing articles about, what we'd learned. I started speaking at conferences, and it turned out this visibility that I got from having a public face
Mhm.
started leading to invitations from other companies and organizations to speak at them. Well, it was kind of a surprise, but I said, okay, well, that sounds all right. And that kind of snowballed. I ended up writing my first book, Creating a Software Engineering Culture, in 1996 while I was still working full-time at Kodak, which was a lot of work, doing a real job and writing a pretty good-sized book. And I had an agreement with my management all along. I was very upfront about this. I had an agreement with my management that I could speak at other companies, teach classes, speak at conferences, and cash the checks, so long as there was no business conflict of interest.
Mhm.
So they wouldn't want me speaking at another photography company, for example.
Right.
So I was at a conference once, probably around 97, and the conference producer, or kind of the manager of the conference, was a well-known software consultant whose work I'd known in the literature for quite a while. And he said, well, it looks like your speaking career is coming along pretty well. When are you going to leave Kodak and hang out a shingle as a consultant? And frankly, I hadn't thought about doing that for a job. And my first reaction was like, that sounds like a really scary idea to me. I like to eat every day. Why would I do that? Because there's a comfort level in a corporate womb. There's a predictable paycheck showing up in your checking account every 2 weeks, and you get vacation time sometimes, and all that. It's kind of comfortable, benefits even.
Mhm.
But then I thought about it, and I said, I don't really like being managed, or don't need to be managed. I don't like being a manager. Maybe I could work by myself. Maybe I could make a living as a consultant. And I figured, well, maybe self-employment would work. And if not, I could probably go back to a regular job. And so I started Process Impact, my consulting company, in late 1997, and I left Kodak just a few months later. And as it turned out, I was always fortunate to get plenty of work. That's a scary thing too, as being
Mhm.
self-employed. Is the phone ever going to ring, right? Turned out the phone rang, and I enjoyed the flexibility, the freedom, the diversity of activities that came along with being an independent consultant. And it worked out better than I thought it might. And so I said, well, I think I'll do that for 20 years or so.
Just like that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you just don't know, and
Right.
there were aspects of it that were surprising to me, but overall, it's suited me well. And so I never really had the temptation to go back to work for another company. Now I don't know that I could.
Right. I can sympathize with that because I started bridging the gap, kind of thinking it was going to be this fill this space in for me, and it was an experiment. And like, oh, I'll
Yeah.
go back at some point when my kids get a little older, and then you get hooked into the consult. My business is much different from yours, right? But you kind of get hooked
Mhm.
into the freedom and the opportunity to have an impact like
Right.
you do
Right.
across multiple organizations. And it's like, oh,
Exactly.
how could I go back? I am my own boss. So, but tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about what you experienced as the differences between being in that corporate setting and being in more of a consulting setting.
Yeah,
Because you alluded to some, just the being your own boss is a big one, right?
Yeah, it's a very different kind of work environment. And you mentioned something important, Laura, which is the opportunity to have an impact on other people. And you can do that to a certain extent inside a company, but a lot of times it's just your local work group. Or maybe if you have some visibility and reputation, and I did develop that at Kodak, other people sometimes would call me and say, hey, we're having trouble with this project. Can you come help us out a little bit? But still, it's limited in scope, and that's why I got a lot of satisfaction from the writing and the speaking and feeling like you're sharing things that are useful to others. But it is very different being on your own. I went from a company of well over 100,000 people to a company with one. And the thing I found first is that when you're an independent like that, you have full responsibility for everything that happens in the company. And, we talked about this, you and I, a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that absolutely everything that has come out of Process Impact, every piece of writing, with the exception of a collaboration on a book that I did, every training course, every presentation, every product, I've done all those myself. And so I think one of the things that came out of that message is that the kinds of people who are suited for this sort of work, and you're probably one of these, are self-starters who can kind of chart your own career path and work on your own. You don't need other people to point you in the right direction. You can figure out a direction.
Right.
Another thing I found is that unless you're working through an agency or a third-party contract company, you're going to have to find your own work. And so it takes some initiative, some patience, and some creativity in how you present yourself to potential clients. You have to become a little bit of a marketer, an accountant, a salesman, a writer, an office administrator. Whether you're out of notepads or coffee or jobs, it's your problem.
Yeah.
That's quite a big difference. You don't have to worry about that in a company.
Yeah, and one of the things I realized as you were saying that, like you take on all these hats, and it's like we're still business analysts. Right. But sometimes I feel like that's the hat that gets dropped in my own company, right? Like because you're wearing so many hats. Like, I should know how to do business analysis. Like, I do know how to do business analysis, but have you had that similar experience? Like, or do you have, do you do business analysis in your own company as well?
Well, in a company of one, I do everything. So yes, I actually have written requirements. So this will perhaps interesting is that I've created a number of products over the years, a bunch of e-learning courseware and other things like that, and I've written requirements for them. So I've actually try to apply what I've learned, and again, I found that taking the time to think through this, to write it down, to remind myself, because your memories aren't perfect, they never are. Just the act of working through what we know about business analysis and writing requirements, it's worth every second you spend on that because it pays off with everything else going smoother. So yeah, I do that, but in a different way than you would on a large software development project.
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, we end up having a lot of checklists and a lot of process flows and just a lot of things that help hold the team together for sure.
Yeah. Another thing I found that was really different about going out on my own, and I noticed this immediately, is that there was a lack of daily opportunities to kick ideas around with other people. And I felt kind of isolated at first. You're used to having people all around to either, to have some social interactions and to scribble on a whiteboard and get feedback on something you've created and point you in the right direction. And I really felt that as kind of a jarring transition from corporate life, both for the professional and the social interactions. And so eventually I closed that gap. I bridged that gap by building this network with other consultants and other professionals and practitioners, many of whom I've never met in face-to-face, but
so online community.
Virtually. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Another really huge difference, of course, for working alone is that your finances are completely different. You might go weeks or months without getting any income. So you need some financial stability to even jump into that pool. It's nice to know if there's water in the pool before you dive in. And you need a comfort level with that erratic income so that you can get through those periods where you might not have much money. And for example, you might deliberately decide to have a period where you don't have much income because you're spending time writing a book or doing something else, so that requires trade-offs. So you have to save some money for the leaner times for your future and, very importantly, for retirement. You're fully responsible for all those things now too. Nobody's putting money in your 401k. Nobody's funding a pension program for you. You want to have money when you're 70 years old, you better put it in the bank. Another thing that gets complicated is your tax returns, and the way you handle taxes. Instead of having a little chunk taken out every paycheck, you have to pay quarterly estimated taxes. Your tax returns get a little more complicated, and that kind of depends on how you structured your business. Now, how are you structured? Are you an LLC or S corp?
We are an LLC filing as an S corp.
Okay.
Yeah.
LLC filing as an S corp. That one, I don't even know about that one.
I might be. Don't hold me to that. We figured it out with the CPA, and then somebody made that happen.
Yeah,
because that's not my area of expertise. Yeah.
Well, nor mine. And that's one thing you're going to do when you become self-employed is you're going to meet an accountant if you haven't already met one. You're probably going to meet a lawyer. And one of the things that my lawyer and accountant suggested to me when I started out both of them said, get QuickBooks. Well, I don't know anything about accounting, but I don't really need to. And I've used QuickBooks all this time and it works fine. So there are different ways you can structure your company. I've always been a sole proprietor. Okay, I'm not incorporated, but many people are, or they have a limited liability company, an LLC. So all of those things have some pluses and minuses regarding the finances and that sort of thing. So some of the things I've talked about here are maybe the rude surprises.
Right.
When you go out on your own, it's like, gee, I didn't know that.
Well, of all of that, like some of those are it's like the overwhelm. But what would you say is the best part? Like what kept you doing this, right? Because you've had to obviously go through all of these challenges, but what kept you in the consultant realm?
Well, once you learn about those other things like the finances and the variability and stuff, once you figure that out, it's like, oh, okay, now I know how that works, so I can move on. But so what I found is big pluses of being self-employed in this field were the huge amount of flexibility in the kind of work that you do. And you can steer your career in pretty much any direction you want to, assuming, of course, there's some market for it. You can decide which job opportunities that come along you're going to accept, which ones you don't want to do for whatever reason. Could be lots of reasons. You can spend as much time or as little time as you wish enhancing your own professional skills, branching out into other areas as your career evolves, and developing the kinds of expertise and clients that you find most rewarding. Another real big plus is you can make a whole lot more money as a consultant than you can in corporate America. You can also make zero money depending on how things go. So, it just kind of depends on how you shape things. But one message that I think is really important that I figured out pretty early on is that it doesn't matter how good you are if no one knows you're there. And that's a big, big difference when you're self-employed. You have to do all of your marketing. You can do it actively, you can advertise, there's always the social media and websites and stuff like that. I've chosen to do all of my marketing passively through my writing and presentations. But people have to know that you're around, what you do, that you have something useful to share. Otherwise, the phone will never ring. And so I've been lucky because nearly all of my clients have come to me. I don't have to go out hunting for them. Sometimes people have to do cold calling or warm calling to follow up, and that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. Just calling somebody and say, "Hey, you got any work for me?" So networking. But
like you say passively, and all your clients have come to you, but it's not that you were waiting for that. So you mentioned writing and speaking, right? Like there were things that you were doing to get your name out, obviously your books, right? So those were bringing clients to you, even though you weren't specifically doing like maybe an active outreach.
Exactly. And
I think it's really important. People don't like when I talk about my business, like I spend most of my time marketing now that we've got a course model, right? It's like it's a big part of the business. So yeah, and
some people don't seem to understand that. I know in particular one consultant who has tried to, be independent from time to time, and very smart guy, just hasn't figured out some of these basic lessons and has never gotten enough work to get traction in it, and didn't do some of the things you need to do to get the visibility to let people know that you're there. So one thing I would suggest that worked for me at least, and if you're thinking about going out on your own, and you're in a company right now, I would suggest trying to do some of those things to spread your face and your name and your knowledge around, and try to line up some clients first before you take the big leap to see if anybody cares that you're there. Or you could work through an agency, another company, maybe there are several companies that do business analysis, and you might end up working through one of those companies instead of being completely independent. But I've really enjoyed being self-employed. It's suited my professional goals, my personality well, and like I said, I just don't think I could go back to a real company. But there are some things I found, even in a one-person company. Management is unreasonable and uninformed. And the staff, they're all lazy and they have a bad attitude. So I guess there's no way to get around that. We have a company slogan, though. Would you like to hear my company slogan?
I would.
Our employee is our greatest asset. And we really believe that. It's true, undeniable.
True. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about like what this actually looks like, because there's lots of ways that you can go as a consultant, right? So we talked about a few weeks ago when we talked, like, you've done a lot of training, but there's also been times when you were like, the guy, like, they hired you to sit in a room for a day and people came in and asked you questions, like just different ways that those engagements played out, and kind of giving people a flavor for what can they actually sell, right? How can they sell their services to people? What that might look like.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of things you can do. And even though I've called myself a consultant for more than 20 years now, frankly, most of the work I've done has been training, because that's just what the phone rang for. I mean, I've done a real wide cross-section of things. One thing I have not done is gone into a company and worked side by side on a project as like a lead BA or as a pair of hands BA, working with, maybe the company's staff when they just wanted some augmentation. I haven't done that kind of extended project, but of course, a lot of BA consultants or contractors do that sort of work. But some of the areas that I've worked in span a huge variety of companies as well. I've worked for maybe 130 different clients over my career in a wide range of industries, all levels of government, state, county, federal, even federal in other countries. I've worked from people from very small companies, maybe 30 people, up to companies of over 100,000 people. And, people sometimes have this debate, well, how important is domain knowledge, if you're going to be a consultant? And I think it's always valuable to have industry experience in a certain field, because it helps you get up to speed quicker, helps you understand the client's terminology and their business practices. You can ask more insightful questions if you know something about the business than if you didn't. But I think as a consultant, it's risky to specialize in particular business areas, because that reduces your potential market. And so I haven't done that. I haven't said, oh, okay, I'm going to specialize in financial industry and just deal with banks and financial services companies. I haven't done that because I don't want to rule out any sorts of work opportunities that might come along.
And it seems like it would be much more volatile too, right? So different industries have trends, and if you're focused in an industry that's in a downswing, that's going to affect your income. Yeah.
I can give you a great example of that. The client I've done the most work for over my entire career is a wonderful guy. His name's Bill. He works in a big company with many, many divisions worldwide, and I've worked with a lot of those divisions as well as with him. He's like director of a software center of excellence in the company, which is very forward-thinking in itself, I think, that they have one. And he would give me pretty much as much work as I wanted to do, but a few years ago, his budget just basically dried up. And the reason for that was because a lot of their revenue came from the oil industry. And at that particular time, the oil industry wasn't doing that well. And so they were tightening their belts. And so if I had specialized in the kind of work that that client does, or if I had, just one client who was my, my money source, I would have been in pretty sorry shape. And I do know some people that happened to. They had one great client for years. The client went away. They had no work. That was pretty scary.
So how did you make that decision? Right, because the decision you made is like, this client could keep me busy, but I am going to choose. You almost like had to say no to them to create some diversity. Yeah. So how did that work?
Well, I was lucky that I had enough different inquiries coming in from different kinds of companies that I could be selective at that time. And Bill was great. He would respect whenever I said no. but he'd come to me with interesting things or stuff that he knew I was a good fit for. And so we had a really nice, and still do, both personal and professional relationship. In fact, I'm going to go do a talk for them in St. Louis in July, which will be the first talk I've done for a little while, and that'll be good to see all those guys again. But I think you do have to decide, do you want to specialize or not? And, you know, I have never found that domain knowledge is really necessary for the process related kinds of things I do, like teaching classes or developing procedures and templates and stuff. Those span, you know, lots of domains, lots of projects, lots of industries, because what we do as business analysts is pretty global, I think. Have you seen that in the kinds of
For
clients
sure.
you do?
I mean, we have the same thing happen in our training, right? It's multiple industries across the globe. It's the same core frameworks that we're teaching again and again and again. And so we get to see how they apply
Right.
across
And it
different
always
domains.
applies.
A business process is a business process, right? How to write a use case is how you write a use case.
It really is. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, when I'm teaching classes, I will definitely try to build in examples or tell stories that are relevant to that audience compared to, say, another audience. But I don't maintain 10 different versions of my training classes with different exercises and things to specialize. And I don't think it makes any difference. I think most of the people who take our classes are smart enough to sort of adapt the idea and intent behind a practice to their reality. So I try to localize it, but I think most BA practices can be applied with just a little thoughtful adaptation to a very wide range of situations.
And that's actually when we talked about impact, like that's of service to people in those companies as well, because I know what we see happen in our training is like people do have this assumption that what they do is unique to their company, and they can see, oh, it's actually not as unique to my company as I thought. And with these little adjustments, I can take this skill I have and make it very transferable in other industries and domains as well. So you're actually kind of helping them make that connection.
Yeah, and that's really valuable for people because they may not be in that company, in that job, in that industry for their whole career. And so realizing that they've got a lot of portable knowledge, I think helps them look beyond whatever little hole they're in at the moment. Another place you see that really is when you do a public class that has people from, you know, just random places come to some public class that you're doing, maybe 25 students from all sorts of backgrounds. You get a little cross-fertilization. You realize that, you know, everybody's wrestling with the same kinds of issues, got the same kinds of frustrations and the same kinds of challenges. So I think that helps people appreciate that, oh yeah, these are pretty common situations.
Yeah, and has public training been part of your model as well?
To a much more limited extent. Almost all the work I've done has been for individual clients. I've never put on my own public classes, just because I never needed to. So I didn't have to take the risk of, let me arrange a room, facilities, marketing, see if anybody shows up. I've done public classes through third-party entities periodically, such as, probably around 2000, year 2000, I did a 2-week European seminar tour through a tool vendor, a requirements management tool vendor. So I gave the same class 6 times over the course of 2 weeks in 6 different cities in Europe, which sounds very exotic and in fact is very tiring and very boring.
Yeah, so there's like that double-edged sword of the consulting again, right? All these amazing places and
but you're working.
Yeah.
I did have a few days off, so that was kind of fun to do a little sightseeing in London and Paris and a few other places. But
you talked about that in your book too, like now in kind of a more mature state of your consulting, like you would frame that a lot differently, right? And make sure you had a couple days maybe in each area to explore. You talked about kind of putting those breaks into the engagement.
Well, and that's another thing that kind of touches on another thing that I learned as I went along in my consulting career is over time I accrued a number of policies. And you know, these aren't written down in a book somewhere, although they easily could be. Well, actually, now they are written down.
Right, like I thought they were in here. Right?
That's right. That's right. But they weren't written in a book at my company, but they're definitely in my new book about successful business analysis consulting. But I did adopt policies like Teaching a 2-day class is fine. I've done many, many 2-day classes. They're tiring, but you can get through it. 3 days is harder, and I just don't like to teach on my feet talking for 4 days in a row. So if someone wants to bring me in to do 2-day classes, I take Wednesday off. I don't charge anybody for that. That's my decision. But I need the downtime. I recover quickly from being tired, but I need the downtime. I need to rest my voice because I have a lot of allergies. It makes it hard to talk for a long time.
I'm so sorry. I thought I turned that off.
That's all right. That happens.
It
happens everywhere.
I need my checklist.
Yes. So I found that I did develop checklists. I developed policies that just said, my life is easier if I do these things than if I don't. And I think every consultant's going to have to develop their own set of practices like that helps them work in an optimal way for them. For example, you have to choose what sort of work you need to do or you like to do. There are kind of 3 consulting modes that I've found that you might find yourself working in. One is as an expert. A client has a problem, wants you to come in and fix it. You might do some training or deliver a process assessment. You might review some project deliverables, give them some feedback. An organization might hire an outside expert to come in and lead the BA efforts on a project or do some coaching, maybe help bring their BAs up to speed and recommend better practices, maybe help establish a business analysis center of excellence. I actually did one job as an expert witness, which is something else you might get hired to do as a consultant in a lawsuit. Fortunately, I didn't have to testify, and I think it was because I concluded that the client who hired me, or the lawyer who hired me, their client was responsible for most of the problems. So he said thank you and sent me a check, and that was that. I didn't have to testify. But those are some of the kinds of things you might end up doing as an expert. But another kind of mode you might work in as a consultant is as a pair of hands, just a practitioner where you're providing some service like routine business analysis that the client company might be able to perform itself, but they just don't have the staff or the time. Maybe they don't have the internal expertise yet, and so they want to bring in somebody to just do BA stuff for them because we don't really have any BAs yet. So then the client defines the need, sets the project expectations and boundary, and then the consultant just kind of does the work on their own. But the third mode, which I think I favor the most, is a collaborative consultant mode. And there's a case where you're joining forces as a consultant with members of the client organization to work on a project or solve a problem together. That kind of helps get you past some of that gap of interactions that I mentioned early on, So what I found at working as a collaborator, you might work on some same deliverables, passing them back and forth, just like you would in a normal job till you complete the project. And their domain knowledge can be really valuable, but it depends on what part you're doing. So for example, I got a job a few years ago. A financial services company called me and said, hey, we're redoing our architectural governance process. I don't even know what that means. And we want to build in peer reviews for that. So you know something about peer reviews. Can you help us do some training and process for that? Well, I don't know anything about architectural governance. I don't know much about financial services, but I know a lot about peer reviews. I wrote a book on that topic as well. So we collaborated. I worked with one of their people or 2 of them, one primarily, and he did parts, I did parts, and I did the parts I was good at, so I didn't have to know about the domain of the business to do my part. And it was a fun collaboration. I think we came out with a nice product that was just what they were looking for. So basically, the diversity of consulting experiences for BAs, project managers, and really anybody in IT just kind of depends on the diversity of activities that somebody might perform in any of those disciplines. There's lots of different kinds of jobs.
And really what I'm taking away from this is like there's not a framework. And so there's this flexible nature of it, and it's about finding the overlap between what that client needs and the expertise and the skills that you offer, and really creating just that win-win scenario. And it could look a lot different than you think. I know one of the mistakes I made starting out was like I had created this whole package of what my consulting was going to look like, right? And I tried to, and I see other people do this too, like, well, I got to figure out what my services are going to be before I can go start trying to find a client. And what I'm hearing you say is, no, just like start talking, sharing what you know, let the clients come to you and figure out what that win-win might be like.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that can work. And a lot of what I've created has been driven by clients. So for example, years and years ago, somebody wrote me, one of the things that happens, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, when you get some public visibility, you get random emails and phone calls from people who have questions or want some help, or do you have
Every
something
day.
that'll do? Sure.
Yeah.
And I always enjoy talking to people like that. I always try to provide a substantive response, to the extent that we have time. And one time somebody got in touch and said, hey, we're trying to figure out how to deal with the requirements change request. Do you have any checklists or anything that can help us assess proposed changes before we say, sure, no problem, we can do that? Well, I didn't, but I said, oh, I think I can do that. And so I came up with some checklists and a planning worksheet and stuff to help people think through the impacts of a change request so they can decide, is this a sensible business thing to do or not? And because of that just random inquiry, I spent a few hours creating stuff that I've then incorporated into books and articles and resources that I've sold or given away and to my training. So a lot of what I've done is not just stuff I invented and said, here's the perfect class, let me go out and see if anybody wants it. It was in response to an inquiry or a need or a question that I got that said, oh, I can do some of that. And that helped me kind of grow my body of resources and my own body of knowledge too by looking into these things.
And it gives you the confidence that what you're creating is what somebody needs and would want, and really does help grow the business.
Yeah, it reduces the speculation.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Gets us out of analysis paralysis, another problem we have a lot as VAs. So this is a good segue because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is mindset, because this has been a new area that we talk a lot about at Bridging the Gap, is the mindset of success and limiting beliefs. So were there limiting beliefs that you had that came up as you started growing this practice, and how did you reframe them to get through them?
Well, I was probably more struck by limited knowledge than limiting beliefs. I didn't really quite know what I was getting into.
Right.
But there are some things that I think do apply there. For example, you might think you need to be a world-class expert in some area before you dare call yourself a consultant and go out and try to help other people. But you don't. And this takes me back, I've been writing articles about software, for, I don't know, 35 years or something, since about 1983, which hardly seems possible. But around 1989, I wrote a little article, kind of tongue-in-cheek, with Wiegers' Laws of Computing. I had about 14 laws of computing. And one of them was, if you are 1 week ahead of the next guy, you are a wizard. And, I think that's still true. You don't have to be the world's expert in something. You just have to know more or have seen more or have more ideas than the person who you're trying to help. It doesn't have to be world-class knowledge. It just has to be more knowledge than they currently have. So a lot of us have that kind of expertise. And I think if you could end up limiting yourself by saying, no, I can't do this yet because I need to take another class, get another certification, read another book. Maybe not. Yeah. Another thing that would certainly be a limiting belief, and this came up very beginning of when I said to my colleagues at Kodak, okay, I'm going to leave in a few months. I'm going to go become a consultant. We'll see what happens. And somebody asked a very insightful question that I had not considered. They said, well, how are you going to stay current if you don't work on projects anymore? Interesting question. At a company, you're working on projects all the time. And so you're learning whatever you need to do the project. But what I realized very quickly was that I don't have to work on projects to learn things, because as a consultant, I stay in touch with lots of clients, or I get a chance to reach out and touch lots of clients, so I can collect experiences from clients that enrich my portfolio of knowledge without having to do it all myself. I don't have to work on a slow multiple month or year project and gather knowledge and do lots of the same things over and over. Instead, I look over people's shoulders. I see what they're struggling with. I see how they do things. And then I can collect that and pass that wisdom along to other clients for a very reasonable price, of course. And that was not obvious to me You know, you
Yeah.
might think, well, if I have to work on projects or I won't grow, and that wasn't true at all. There's lots of ways to grow without having to suffer it all yourself.
And I just crossed that limiting belief a couple of years ago because
Oh yeah.
that was part of my like, oh, I'll do this, for a certain amount of time. And then I need to go back if I'm going to stay relevant, right? And then
Hmm.
I realized like, no, just like you're looking over the shoulder of your consult companies, right?
Right.
I'm looking over the shoulder of our trainers, our
Hmm.
instructors, our participants, and I'm
Right.
seeing what's happening and do that and add a few conferences in the mix. And
Right.
it's,
So you get ideas, and I think
yeah.
that's something I'm pretty good at um, is seeing what other people do that seem like good ideas and say, oh, I think I'll do that from now on. You know, maybe it's just the way somebody dealt. One of them was just the way somebody dealt with flip charts at a conference. And I said, that's better than what I do. I will do that from now on. And I have ever since. And that was many,
Oh,
many
that's
years ago.
amazing. Yeah.
And so I think you can, if you're paying attention, which is a key point here, if you're paying attention and actively looking for ways to do what you do better tomorrow than you did it yesterday,
Hmm.
you don't have to do projects all yourself. You don't even have to do all the work all yourself. So like in my books, I've got this, some books on software requirements. There's lots of stories in there, lots of anecdotes. Every single one of them is true. They're not necessarily things I did personally, but they're all things either I've done personally or seen other people personally do. And
Hmm.
so they're all real experiences that we can all learn from.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book because I know I want to make sure we're making good use of your time. And you have just authored this new book, Successful Business
Yes.
Analysis Consulting. I'm just curious why you decided to write it, what somebody can hope to gain from, or what
Mhm.
a reader can hope to get out of it. Obviously, you've shared a lot of gems with us today about consulting, and I'm
Mhm.
sure there's a lot more in here as well.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think one point is that the things that are in the book, even though the title says Successful Business Analysis Consulting, they apply to project managers and any kind of IT consultant, and really just anyone who wants to be self-employed and kind of go out and try to provide services to clients on their own. Um, so it's not really limited to BAs,
Mhm.
but this fits nicely in a line at the publisher. I have a series of BA analysis books, and so this was kind of uh, the piece to go into the catalog. But when I started out more than 20 years ago, I didn't know much about being self-employed or being an independent consultant, and there weren't a lot of resources available for me to learn from. But I have figured out how to make it work. I was lucky to be more successful than I expected. And one thing I've done all along my career is say, hey, I've learned something. Maybe someone else would like to know this. Is there a way I can share that?
Yeah.
Because again, I don't think we should all have to climb the same painful learning curves. So I like to share what I've learned to make other people's lives easier. And I wrote the Successful Business Analysis Consulting book, which contains pretty much everything I've learned in my consulting career. Every once in a while, I'll remember something else that's not in the book and say, oh yeah, I learned that too. But I've sort of internalized them all.
Yeah.
Also, I got a number of other experienced consultants to contribute chapters. And so the reader will benefit from multiple perspectives, not just my personal experience and background. So this is really the book that I wish I had had available before I decided to go out on my own and just see what happens. So there's a lot of stuff in there. There's 35 chapters grouped into 6 parts. I start by trying to help you lay the foundation, this idea of letting the world know you're open for business. How do you even do that?
Yeah.
But another thing that we haven't talked about yet is that, and you've probably seen this, if you're self-employed, working out of your house maybe, there's going to be some different impacts on your life and on your family's life. And you
Mhm.
probably have to consider those. Someone who's used to having the house to themselves during the day, all of a sudden has you around also. And that might change the way you do things. And that first part of the book, I also talk about working with professional organizations like the IIBA. And that's a really good way to get some visibility. You can start giving talks at local chapters of your various professional organizations, and people will say, oh, this is a useful person across town to know.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing I talk a lot about is things that I've learned, realities about this kind of a job, mostly through trial and error. And the errors really weren't that much fun. So if I can save somebody else from having to make some of the mistakes I did, I think that's a good thing. So that's where I talk about checklists. and techniques for engaging with clients. I describe a couple of ideal clients I've had that were just been dreams to work with, but also a bunch of warnings about some of the headaches that clients can give you, and ways to look for them and ways to avoid them. A lot of what I talk about is very practical. I'm a pragmatist. I'm not a theorist or a methodologist. So I've got some very practical stuff in there about the things any new consultant has to face, like, what do I charge? How do you set your rates? How do you manage your finances? How do you negotiate written agreements with clients to be both to your advantage, but also fair? Because I think win-win is a very important outcome that you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. We mentioned the idea of establishing business policies, and something that people sometimes either don't think about or obsess about is insurance. Your company's not buying insurance for you anymore. You have to do that. And there's different kinds of insurance you need if you're self-employed, as well as things that you're already familiar with. But you probably want to grow your business, right? You start, you've done that. You started by yourself, and you got all sorts of people doing things with you now. Mm-hmm. And so you found ways to grow it. And one of the things that I found was ways to develop multiple revenue streams. There's a whole chapter that talks about ways you can earn a living while you're asleep. Mm-hmm. That's my favorite part. That became my goal. Some years ago, I said, how can I earn a living while I'm asleep? And I thought of several ways to do that, which actually worked surprisingly well. How do you land new business and repeat business? And one of the chapters talks about remote consulting. And that's something that you might do if you're independent. You might end up working with somebody, either a client or a colleague, at a distance. Mm-hmm. Kind of like we're doing right now. We got technology.
Yeah, the internet is amazing. I'm grateful for it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So two other areas that I think are really important to consultants, and I've alluded to those before talking about my own background. One is giving presentations. That's pretty scary for lots of people, very understandably. But BAs and consultants often are called upon to give presentations of various kinds. You might do that to enhance your visibility or share what you know at conferences or teach classes. So I've got a lot of tips about how to give effective presentations with confidence. Mm-hmm. And those alone, I think, can make almost anybody feel better about standing in front of an audience. You're going to develop intellectual property. You've got a lot, I've got a lot, and we have to protect that. We want to find ways to leverage it. So that you can, again, maximize your revenue with minimum work. And I've found some ways that work for me to do that. And there's a big section in the book about writing for publication, because that can really enhance your consulting career, as we've been talking about. You've got a book, I've got books, and people call us because they saw our books and said, oh, this looks like a useful person. Maybe we can get them to come teach us a class, or maybe we can send a bunch of people to their class or something. So publishing is a great way to share your knowledge and to promote yourself and your business, whether you're writing for websites or blogs or magazines or books. I've got a lot of information in there that you don't see most places about how do you work with editors? What are the different kinds of editing? Mm-hmm. How do you put together a book proposal if you've got a book story that you want to try to sell to a publisher? What goes into a publication contract? What should you watch out for? And how do you self-publish if you decided to go that route? I've done that a couple times, and I learned a little bit about that. And finally, I've got a whole chapter on co-authoring a book with other people, because Joy Beatty and I worked together on the 3rd edition of my software requirements book. And that was a fun project. It was a huge project, and she was just an absolute dream to work with, and I'm very happy with that book. So there's a lot of stuff in the book there.
Yeah, I feel like, to sum up, like, you've covered it all, right? Like, it's not just like the one little piece of how to be a consultant or like what the engagement looks like. It's really how do you build this as a business? As a business,
exactly.
And as a potentially career-long, lifelong business. So that's
I've tried to share pretty much everything that I've found, both good and bad about it. And I've got some really good input from some of the other consultants who contributed chapters who, we've all had different sets of experiences. And so getting some different angles helps a reader figure out, well, what parts of this are most useful to the kind of work that I think I want to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And people can find that. We'll leave a link below. Okay. And is there a quick link? I kind of forgot that piece that they can go to if they're just listening in.
Right. Well, there are several places you can go. The best place is probably my website, processimpact.com.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a personal site, karlwiegers.com, and that's I before E except after C. And at karlwiegers.com, you can find out about both my technical and non-technical books. And you can also hear 17 songs that I wrote and recorded just for fun, plus a lot of covers I've recorded. I'm no professional musician, and thank you for noticing, but I already know I can't sing, but I don't let that stop me.
I love it. Someday we'll have to get back together and talk about the other things that you're doing outside of consulting. And I'm sure you can find it on like Amazon and,
Oh, yes.
and major retailers as well. So.
Yep. That's all true. It's readily available, and there's a landing page at my processimpact.com website that gives some sample chapters and a lot of very kind reviews. And I want to thank you, Laura, for your very nice foreword that you wrote for the book. That was a very nice plus, and I appreciate it.
I was honored. Yeah, thank you. And so we'll leave a link to that below as well, so anybody can get right to all the goodies too.
Great.
So one final question for you. You've been so generous with your knowledge and your sharing today, but what does success look like to you, Karl?
Well, I had to think about that a few years ago when I was contemplating making a career change. I had to think about, where do I get a lot of satisfaction? Mm-hmm. And I concluded that I derive a lot of satisfaction from helping people do a better job with my help than they might have done otherwise. Mm-hmm. I get more pleasure from that than I do from inventing new schemes or models or anything like that. So that led me to do work in the general area of process improvement. And I think of that as a very broad thing of training and consulting, and I'm pretty good at finding ways to improve things, whatever people are doing. It's hard for me not to spot something that could be done better. And so success to me is mostly hearing from people who have taken my classes or read my books or articles, who tell me how helpful my material has been to them, or they relate stories about how things have improved in their company since they started applying some of the techniques I advocate. That really means a lot to me. And anytime I hear that people find my work to be useful, I feel like I've done something helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's the impact in Process Impact, right?
That's the impact, exactly.
Yeah, I love it.
That name was carefully chosen.
I'm sure it was. All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, you shared so many awesome tips and ideas, and I think probably convinced a lot of BAs that they might want to be a consultant someday. So, or giving them a really good reason to stay in corporate, right? One or the other, which either is totally fine.
Well, so long as people can reach a conclusion and say, well, I'm pretty comfortable with what I've decided, that's what's important.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karl.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Laura.
You're welcome.